Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 42 of Davidson Hang Reflections podcast. I wanted to share with you some of my favorite quotes I'm reading Martin Luther King's biography. It's autobiography by Clayborn Carson. So, wanted to share with you some of the quotes that have made a difference. Really highly recommend the book. I'm someone who I've read Muhammad Ali's book and a couple others, but I think so far this is my favorite one in terms of just like the rawness and what he's doing. So I will start. So so he really respected Gandhi. So he wrote, Gandhi was probably the first person in history to lift the love ethic of Jesus above mere interaction between individuals to a powerful and effective social force on a large scale. This Gandhian emphasis on love and nonviolence that I discovered for social reform I had been seeking. So he followed Gandhi pretty um, closely. That was a lot of his inspiration. So he says, true pacifism is not unrealistic submission to evil power. It is a courageous confrontation of evil by the power of love in the faith that it is better to be the recipient of violence than the inflictor of it. And since the latter only multiplies the existence of violence and bitterness in the universe, while the former may develop a sense of shame in the opponent and therefore bring a transformation and change of heart. Yeah. Here's another good one. I was now overcome, obsessed by a feeling of inadequacy. In the state of anxiety, I wasted 5 minutes of the original 20, with nothing left but faith in a power whose matchless strength stands over against the frailties and inadequacy of human nature. I turned to God in prayer. My words were brief and simple, asking God to restore my balance and to be with me in a time where I needed his guidance more than ever. With less than 15 minutes left, I began preparing an outline. In the midst of this, however, I faced a new and sobering dilemma. How could I make a speech that would be militant enough to keep my people aroused to positive action, and yet moderate enough to keep his fever within controllable and Christian bounds? I knew that many of the Negro people were victims of bitterness and could easily rise to flood proportions. What could I say to keep them courageous and prepared for positive action and yet devoid of hate and resentment? Could the militant and the moderate be combined in a single speech? You can tell that he was very thoughtful in his speeches. Obviously, he's a great public speaker and orator, probably one of the best in the world, similar to Obama. And yeah, I that really talks about how much preparation and how much thoughtfulness goes into his planning for his speeches. When I began to look around, I was appalled at the conditions I saw that I soon forgot my own predicament. I saw men lying hard on hardwood slats and others resting on cots with torn up mattresses. The toilet was in one corner of the cell without a semblance of enclosure. I said to myself that no matter what these men had done, they shouldn't be treated like this. So he talks about how poor the conditions in the jail cell were and just really how inhumane it was to have people living in these conditions. So the evening came and I mustered enough courage to tell them the truth. I tried, however, to end on a note of hope. This may be well, I said. The darkest hour just before dawn, have moved all of these months with the daring faith that God was with us in our struggle. The many experiences of days gone by have been vindicated that faith in the most unexpected manner. We must go out with the same faith, the same conviction. We must believe a way that would be made out of no way. But in spite of these words, I could feel a cool breeze of pes- pessimism passing through the audience. It was a dark night, darker than 1,000 midnights. It was the night in which the light of hope was about to fade away and the lamp of faith about to flicker. We went home with nothing before us but a cloud of uncertainty. It really goes to show that, he had some dark nights, right? It was, being a leader is tough, and um, I'm glad that he was able to share with us his feelings. So this part really touched me. His relationship with his wife was so lovely. He said, "Telegram to Coretta Scott King. It was on February 14th, 1957, New Orleans. Mrs. Coretta King, my darling, it's a pleasure for me to pause while attending to the most important business which affects the welfare of this nation and attend to the most important business in the world, namely choosing as my Valentine the sweetest and most lovely wife and mother in all the world. As the days go by, my love grows even greater for you will always be my Valentine, Martin." Really shows his big heart and how he's not only is he able to cause so much change, but he clearly loves his wife and talks about how every great man had his wife was a huge source for him during all these tough times. When you're when you are aware that you are a symbol, it causes you to search your soul constantly, to go through this job of self-analysis, to see if you live up to high and noble principles people people surround you with, and try at all times to keep the gulf between the public self and the private self at a minimum. That's leadership in a nutshell. So he talks about Ghana, and this part was really touching as well. So he flew to Ghana while they got their independence from the British colony. So he says, a handsome black man walked out on the platform, and he was followed by 8 or 10 other men. He stood there and said, We are no longer a British colony. We are free. We are a free and sovereign people." While he uttered those words, we looked back and saw an old flag coming down and a new flag going up. And I said to myself, that old flag coming down doesn't represent the meaning of this drama taking place on stage of history, for it is a symbol of an old order passing away. That new flag going up is a symbol of a new age coming into being. I could hear people shouting all over the vast audience, "Freedom, freedom." And before I knew it, I started weeping. I was crying for joy, and I knew all about the struggles, all of the pain, and all of the agony that these people have gone through for this moment. A really touching moment and really inspiring as well. When I hear people aren't ready, that's like telling a person who's trying to swim, don't jump into that water until you learn how to swim. When you actually, when actually you will never learn how to swim until you get into the water. People have to have an opportunity to develop themselves and govern themselves. It's I interpreted that as like until you do it, you're just a spectator. In Landmark, we call that on the court. So there's people who are watching the basketball games, and then there are athletes who are actually playing the game. Which one do you want to be? So he talks a lot about India, and in this chapter, he says, crowded humanity. India is a vast country with vast problems. We flew over the long stretches from north to south, east to west. We took trains for shorter jumps and used automobiles and jeeps to get us into the less accessible places. Everywhere we went, we saw crowded humanity on the roads, in the city streets and squares, and even in the villages. Most of the people were poor and poorly dressed. In the city of Bombay, for instance, for with over 500,000 people. unattached, unemployed, or partially employed males slept out of the doors every night. Great ills flowed from the poverty of India, but strangely, there was relatively little crime. He was comparing how different India was, and it really made you think about, why we have crime in America. And he talks a lot about um, the living conditions of India. So he said, on the other hand, there were others, perhaps the majority, who said that Westernization would with it and its evils and materialism, cutthroat competition, and rugged individualism. They said that India would lose her soul if she took a chasing to Yankee dollars, and that big machine would only raise the living standard comparatively few workers who got jobs, but the greater number of people would be displaced. So I wanted to this is the way he spoke about Gandhi. Gandhi was able to mobilize and galvanize more people in his lifetime than any other person in the history of this world. And with just a little love and understanding, goodwill, and a refusal to cooperate with an evil law, he was able to break the backbone of the British Empire. This, I think, was the most significant thing that ever happened in the history of the world. More than 390 million people achieved their freedom, and they achieved it non-violently. I was delighted that Gandhi is um, Gandhi uh, Gandhi. So people who support Gandhi accepted us with open arms. They praised our experiment with the non-violent resistance technique at Montgomery. They seemed to look upon it as an outstanding example of the possibilities of its use in Western civilization. This this part was actually pretty eye-opening for me. He said, the principal introduced us as he came to the conclusion of his introduction. He says, young people, I would like to present to you a fellow untouchable from the United States of America. And for that moment, I was a bit shocked and peeved that I would be referred to as untouchable. I started thinking about the fact 20 million of my brothers and sisters were still smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in an affluent society. He said, he telegrammed to President Kennedy, Dear Mr. President, gratified by the directness of your statement to Albany crisis, Reverend Abernathy and I earnestly hope you will continue the use of the great moral influence of your office to help this critical situation. And then this is an example where he's made a mistake, or where he reflected on how he could be more effective. He said, if I had to do that again, I would guide that the community's Negro leadership differently than I did. The mistake I made there was to protest against segregation generally rather than against a simple and distinct facet of it. Our protest was so vague that we got nothing, and the people were left very depressed and in despair. It would have been much better upon concentrated upon integrating the buses or the lunch counters. One victory of this kind would have been symbolic, would have galvanized support and boosted morale. But I don't mean that our work in Albany ended in failure. What we've learned from our mistakes in Albany helped later campaigns in other cities to be more effective. We never since scattered our efforts in a general attack on segregation, but focused upon specific symbolic objectives. That's good advice for anyone who's wants to make change. So yeah, I wanted to share with you all these beautiful quotes. I've gotten a lot from this biography, and yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this conversation, and let me know if you decide to read his biography as well. Cheers.